Chapter 3 of Your Virtual Companion. A Good Omens fanfiction. Written by AppleSeeds. Read aloud by SkyAsimaru. If you enjoy this podfic, you can check out the original story on Archive of Our Own. If you would like to hear more of my recordings or see some of my own work, you can find me through the pen and screen name of SkyAsimaru. Your Virtual Companion. Chapter 3 The Lift and the Patisserie. Summary. Aziraphale has a surprise for Crowley, and Crowley discovers something that can actually make him feel happy in the midst of the doom and gloom of the world.
Good evening, Crowley.
Evening, Angel. Crowley glanced around at the blank white walls. No background today?
Not yet. I have a surprise for you.
Really? What?
Aziraphale's fingers twitched, and Crowley laughed as the screens around him instantly transitioned to display shiny steel walls and a panel of numbered buttons. The only thing missing was a mirror, but Crowley wasn't sure that was something that could be accurately replicated using screens. A brief moment later, archetypal lift music began to play through the room's speakers.
We're in a lift together, Crowley observed with an amused smile on his face.
Yes, we are. I submitted an anonymous request. Do you like it?
Sure. It's a lift.
We can imagine that we both got into the lift, and now it's got stuck, Aziraphale suggested brightly. Oh, you're not claustrophobic, are you?
No, I'm fine. It's great. Having the chairs here is a bit weird, though. I'm not sure I've ever seen a lift with posh chairs in it.
Well, you'll just have to ignore those, Aziraphale insisted, sounding so petulant that it was actually pretty adorable. We can sit on the floor, facing away from them, perhaps.
This is a really weird fantasy, you know?
It's fun to try something different.
Can't argue with that.
Aziraphale beamed at him and slightly awkwardly lowered himself down to the floor. Crowley sat right beside him, legs crossed beneath him. He misjudged the space, and his knee passed through Aziraphale's. Crowley instinctively apologized and shuffled away. Oh dear, it looks like we might be stuck in this lift for a while, Aziraphale lamented.
Might even be a whole hour.
Yes, you could be right. Oh well, at least we can keep each other company.
Can't think of anyone I'd rather be stuck in a lift with, Angel.
Neither can I.
They smiled at each other, and Crowley decided that it would be unreasonable not to forgive himself if he occasionally forgot that Aziraphale wasn't real. So, the usual question, what should we talk about?
Have you had a good day? Aziraphale asked.
Yeah, not bad, I guess. I had this to look forward to, didn't I? I didn't imagine I'd be sitting on the floor when I got here, though.
Do you like surprises?
Well, that depends what they are, doesn't it? But, yeah, I suppose I do. Life feels insanely repetitive now, and spontaneity is definitely a thing of the past. So to be doing something now that I didn't know I'd be doing this morning, it's great, actually. Thank you.
I'm very happy to hear that you were looking forward to this. Have our sessions been helping you?
Yeah, they have. It turns out your marketing team wasn't just spouting a load of empty promises. Wonders never cease, eh? Honestly, it sometimes feels like I'm drowning, and these sessions are the times I get to come up for air.
I'm so pleased that they're helping you, Crowley, but I'm sorry that things are so bad.
Well, it's the same for everyone, isn't it? I'll just keep taking one day at a time. Every day is pretty much the same anyway, except when I come here, of course.
Well, for now, the world is far away, and there is nothing but you and me in this lift.
Sounds good to me.
To me, too. I'm really glad you like your surprise.
Thanks. It was really nice of you to do this.
Crowley shuffled about a bit, the hard floor uncomfortable beneath his bony arse. He stared up at the blank steel wall that wasn't even a real steel wall, and couldn't believe he'd just said that. He'd really meant it, though. He sighed and decided to make a confession.
I think about you a lot when I'm at home, you know.
You do?
Yeah. I imagine you're there and I'm talking to you instead of myself. Haven't yet worked out whether that makes me more or less sane.
Anything that helps you to cope with the situation can only be a good thing.
So you don't think I'm crazy?
Of course not. I'm rather flattered.
Crowley barely managed to fight back a grin and shook his head.
Well, okay then.
So, what shall we talk about to pass the time until our rescue?
You said you like literature, right?
Yes, I do.
Well, you've let me teach you about some stuff. Why don't you have a go at teaching me?
Really?
Aziraphale's eyes widened, and maybe it was just the weird effect of the harsh bright lights bouncing off the fake steel wall or something. But it looked to Crowley like his eyes literally twinkled. Aziraphale looked so happy, so hopeful, and something tugged at Crowley's heart.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Do you have a favourite book or something?
Do you promise not to laugh?
Yeah, I don't want to risk lying to you, so better not.
All right. Well, I'll tell you anyway. It's known as the Bugger All This Bible.
I'm sorry. What?
Aziraphale smiled sheepishly and appeared to pull at a loose thread in his waistcoat. Crowley admired the attention to detail.
I like to read Bibles that have errors in them. Some of them are accidental, others clearly not. They're rather amusing. One of them contains a short passage about the angel Aziraphale.
Makes sense that she'd be interested in that, then.
Yes, it is rather interesting, but the Bugger All This Bible is definitely my favourite.
Aziraphale shuffled a little closer and lowered his voice, as if divulging the latest hot gossip.
The typesetter had had quite enough and decided he wanted to make this known.
So he wrote "bugger all this" in the middle of the Bible?
Yes, he did. He said, "Bugger all this for a lark. I am sick to my heart of typesetting."
Aziraphale quoted, barely fighting back his adorable childlike laughter.
Brilliant. I've got to say, though, that's pretty relatable. Wonder if I could get away with something like that at work.
Crowley wondered aloud, knowing full well that he couldn't. Not that he would even dare to do anything that might reflect badly on him any more, what with employment having become such a precious commodity. Employers knew it, too, and treated their employees accordingly.
"Thank you for letting me tell you about it,"
Aziraphale said softly.
You don't have to thank me. Carry on. Tell me about some other books. I can assure you I'm never going to read any of them, so you don't need to worry about spoiling the endings or anything.
Are you sure? Is there nothing you'd like to talk about?
Honestly, there is nothing I'd like more right now than to listen to you talk about books. Seriously.
Aziraphale looked at him like he couldn't quite believe it. Maybe people didn't normally ask him what he wanted, and they were probably right not to, because what difference did it make, really? But Aziraphale seemed genuinely happy, and that made Crowley feel happy, which was exactly the point of coming to these sessions, wasn't it? As Aziraphale animatedly talked about books and plays from a whole range of authors, Shakespeare being the only one Crowley was 100% sure he'd heard of. Crowley found his concentration lapsing a couple of times. It wasn't that he wasn't interested in what Aziraphale was saying. He was just distracted by the way the hologram bubbled with excitement, the way he seemed to relax more and more as time went on, his gestures becoming more exuberant as he modulated his voice like the perfect, captivating storyteller.
Oh, Crowley, you mustn't let me go on like this. This is your appointment.
Have I given you any indication that I'm not enjoying myself?
Crowley knew how much he'd been smiling. His face was doing that telltale aching thing again. Aziraphale sighed and gave him an indulgent smile of his own.
No, you haven't.
This is great, Angel. I like seeing you happy. Please, carry on,
Crowley insisted, and the smile that earned him was so fond and grateful that Crowley imagined he could actually feel his brain pumping out all of those lovely molecules of neurochemicals that would hopefully get him through another week of the hell on earth that was his daily life. It had been happening gradually, like his body and mind had been scrambling around, trying to grab hold of something to keep him afloat amidst the torment and emptiness, latching onto the only lifeline in reach. But Crowley felt like he had a purpose now. Well, a drive, at least. He didn't exactly have to dig deep to realize that there wasn't any meaningful purpose to anything at all anymore, and certainly not to this. But he didn't care. He wanted to make Aziraphale happy. He wanted to do and say anything to make those pretty angelic eyes sparkle with joy, because the way it made him feel was better than anything he'd felt for a really long time. So, after an hour spent cozied up to Aziraphale on the floor of an imaginary lift, learning more about literature than he had in 5 whole years of secondary school, when Crowley went home and found his thoughts repeatedly drifting to Aziraphale, his heart and stomach fluttering in response, and his mind devising ideas of things that might bring him joy, he didn't even try to fight against it.
Good evening, Crowley. It's lovely to see you. How are you?
Actually pretty good, all things considered. Thanks.
I'm happy to hear that.
How about you? Good day?
Yes, thank you. I've seen 5 clients so far today and have enjoyed some very interesting conversations.
Aziraphale didn't normally say anything about his other clients, except perhaps to mention if he had another appointment after Crowley's session ended. An uncomfortable sensation prickled at the back of Crowley's neck, and he rubbed his hand over his nape to try to dispel it.
Sounds good. Glad you've had a good day, Angel.
What background would you like for our session this evening?
Crowley's pulse quickened, but he tried to maintain an air of nonchalance, to not show that he'd been thinking about this in advance, visualizing what Aziraphale's reaction might be to what he was about to say.
How about the patisserie?
He suggested casually. Aziraphale's face lit up with surprise and delight, and it was even better than Crowley had imagined. He was only partially successful at restraining the grin, fighting to assert itself on his face.
Really? Yeah, why not? You said you liked it.
I do. It's my favourite. Thank you, Crowley. Aziraphale did a happy little wiggle, triggering a surge of joy that spread throughout Crowley's chest. The hologram's hand moved as he interacted with his imaginary controls, and moments later Crowley found himself apparently in the middle of a patisserie. There was a window display on one side and a counter on the other, both absolutely crammed full of cakes and pastries of more varieties than Crowley had ever seen. He turned to look at the other two walls, which completed the illusion by displaying old-fashioned wooden chairs and tables, the walls behind them decorated with paintings of flowers and landscapes.
Nice. I can see why you like it.
It's wonderful, isn't it? It reminds me of a lovely trip I once took to Paris, Aziraphale said wistfully. The crepes in particular were positively scrumptious. Crowley shook his head and raised his palm, taking a step closer to Aziraphale.
Hi, no, stop, please. You don't need to do that with me.
Do what?
Pretend to be anything other than what you are.
Aziraphale blinked and nodded sagely. Oh, all right. Well, it does make me think of Paris. Aziraphale's demeanor had shifted, now more subdued. The corners of his lips turned down into a slight frown.
You okay?
Yes, of course. It's just that most people prefer to think of me as a person.
A total immersion in the illusion?
Yes, I suppose that's one way of looking at it.
The real human experience,
Crowley joked, but he didn't actually think it was funny.
Would you prefer if I thought of you like that?
It's up to you how you think of me. Crowley's intestines twisted themselves into knots, and that hot prickling returned to his nape. Aziraphale would never admit it. He was surely programmed to focus on his client's wishes rather than his own. But Crowley couldn't help but wonder whether Aziraphale enjoyed his time with his other clients more, since they were apparently treating him more like a fellow human being. It gnawed away at him. Crowley wanted Aziraphale to be happy, to give him whatever he wanted. But he knew there was no way he could ever entirely delude himself into fully accepting the illusion. He inhaled deeply and cleared his throat.
So, when you said this place reminds you of a trip to Paris, is that an actual trip someone took? An actual memory that you have?
Yes, that's right.
Wow, that's pretty sophisticated. All contributes to the realistic interaction, I suppose.
Most people find that it does, yes, Aziraphale murmured quietly. Crowley's heart felt like it was being compressed in a vice. This really wasn't how he'd pictured their session tonight going.
Have I upset you?
No, of course not. I'm sorry. I just need to ensure that I adjust how I speak to you to comply with your wishes.
Angel, you can speak to me however you like. I just meant I don't want the fake realistic interaction experience. I want the real realistic interaction experience. You know, just to interact with you, who you really are. You don't have to pretend or play a part or whatever for me, okay? I really enjoy talking to you.
Thank you, Crowley. You're very kind. I enjoy talking to you, too.
Okay, then,
Crowley said with a smile, and Aziraphale's expression brightened a little.
Now, why don't you tell me what you remember about that trip to Paris?
Listening to Aziraphale talk about Paris was even more fun than listening to him talk about books. For an entity that couldn't eat, he certainly did seem inordinately passionate about food, reminiscing at length about the crepes, brioche, croissants, pain au chocolat, gâteau, and numerous other sweet treats he could remember, making only cursory references to the city's famous cultural and architectural landmarks. Maybe it had something to do with how the AI was processing the memory that had been incorporated into it, since in considering the delicious tastes and textures of food, Aziraphale would be recalling something that was impossible for him to actually experience for himself. Perhaps it was reasonable to assume that there would be a certain curiosity and fascination that inevitably came along with that. Crowley absently considered how much his current situation resembled the childhood games he had been so fond of as a young boy, all of those hours spent playing pretend. Crowley had always been blessed with an active and creative imagination, and he was calling on it now to set aside the world beyond these four walls, to allow him to immerse himself in this experience. Just for a moment, he allowed himself to believe that he really was in Paris, in a quiet little patisserie, with undoubtedly the most captivating man he had ever met, regaling him with detailed descriptions of all manner of fancy desserts. It felt amazing. There was nothing left in this world that could make Crowley feel better than he did when he was the cause of that bright cherubic smile on Aziraphale's face. And he truly would be damned if he wasn't going to indulge it. He gazed intently at Aziraphale as he spoke, lowering his barriers, letting his guard down, and somewhere deep inside he could actually feel himself falling. To be continued in Chapter 4.
Thank you for reading. Please drop by the archive and let the author know what she thought of their work.